Poppy Playtime Chapter 2, Fly on a Web, releasing on May 5th, 2022, is the second chapter of the game Poppy Playtime created by Mop Games, continuing the first chapter of the game, A Tight Squeeze. Now, this game has been hated relentlessly due to both its first chapter being a generic indie horror game that is all ran by a timer, and the heads at Mob Games doing shitty things like the NFTs, the bullying of Eekroaster, their controversial Minecraft animations, and more. Both of these were not doing the reputation of Poppy Playtime any favors. To make it worse, Zach and Seth Belanger both made individual statements that addressed these problems people have with them, with the overall response from people being that these were not genuine and were rather PR moves so Chapter 2 can sell well, indicated by the fact Zach's statement came out 2 days before the chapter's release, and Seth's statement being a day before. It was clear that not a lot of people were excited for Chapter 2, and if they possibly were, it was to see how shit it was going to be. A lot of people's expectations were really low. Then the chapter came out, and it started receiving positive reception. A lot of people were surprised with the quality of the chapter. Today we're going to see if Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 is legitimately good and better than expected. Before we begin, if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe down below and turn on the notification bell. All are totally optional, but it would be appreciated if you did. Also, there will be spoilers for the chapter. Without further ado, let's get into this. To start off with the negatives, why is this chapter $10 when the Kickstarter promised each of the chapters were going to be $5? And to make it worse, Chapter 1 was made permanently free the day before Chapter 2 release, which beforehand, it was $5. That means if you bought the first chapter for $5 before it was free, you got ripped off. Woohoo! Seriously, Mob Games, what the hell? It's only $5 though, so it's not as bad, but still. To make this all better though, the game had bugs upon launch. And to add to all of this pain, there was a huge soft lock that made the game unplayable for many people. Seriously, this is why you need beta testers. Furthermore, Braun was a disappointment. I wish he had more time to shine because the concept for his character is legitimately amazing. He's meant to be a blind enemy, which would have been really cool to see in action. But sadly, he's just missed potential, with his only notable role being to drag him away with the crane. Furthermore, I feel like the chapter picks up in the second half of it and the first half is a little slow to play. And for my final negative for the game, the ending is kinda dog shit. It's just another typical take the player back to square one ending, which makes everything you played ultimately pointless. So why should I care about this ending? Overall though, these are my negatives of the chapter. They're pretty glaring, but in a surprise twist of events, believe it or not, I think the positives of this chapter are stronger than its negatives. For one, by far, the best part about this chapter is Mommy Longlegs. In terms of character design, she's but her role in the game is honestly cool. She's legitimately freaky, and how she tries to go after the player just makes the player feel tense. What I think makes Mommy Longlegs work in this chapter as opposed to Huggy Wuggy in Chapter 1 is that in the first chapter, Huggy Wuggy doesn't feel like a proper monster. He just feels like an AI program following its code. There's no fear to be found. But Mommy Longlegs actually gives off the feeling that she's hunting you down, and she can actually be perceived as a serious threat. Also, the fact she's a spider is just utilized so well, like damn. Although, to be fair, she is better near the end of the game, because that's when we really get to see what she's about. I appreciate the taunting characteristic of her throughout the whole chapter, but you don't beat how she is at the end. And speaking of the end of the chapter, and Mommy Longlegs being a better antagonist than Huggy Wuggy, the chase boss section in this chapter is far better than the first chapters. It's more unique in how you escape Mommy Longlegs, and further helps add the freakiness to her. It's just much more satisfying too. Another huge advantage to this chapter is just the amount of content present in this. It's a lot, and I think most of it works well to help create an interesting but enjoyable gameplay experience. One of these is the length of the chapter being longer than the first. With the first chapter being 30 minutes long, this chapter is around 2 hours long, and I can definitely say that most of it was not boring at all. Another aspect that makes this chapter much more huge is the fact there are now multiple enemies, and these new enemies were pretty decent. Bunzo was pretty cool. PJ's part was honestly one of the strongest parts of the chapter in terms of gameplay, and it's just all neat in execution. As well, another thing that makes this chapter more grand than the first are the fact that the puzzles are more creative and unique. If this chapter was being lazy, it would have been constantly using the same ass grabber puzzles, but there's a lot more variation that it's actually not so bad. The graphics are very much improved here too. It looks like more effort was made into making it stand out, and in a good way. And the soundtrack is still pretty good too, and the voice acting efforts were well done. And for my final positive, I really appreciate the fact that this chapter seemed to have taken more of a horror approach as opposed to the babyish dumbing down feel like in chapter 1. And considering who this game tries to market to, absolute hats off. Let's just say, I'm surprised about all of this. I did not expect to like this chapter at all. I thought it would be just as shit or even shittier than chapter 1, but I'm legitimately surprised that I actually liked this chapter. It's not amazing, but it's honestly pretty good, and far better than what I expected. Chapter 1 was a 30-minute tech demo with no real gameplay, but chapter 2 was actual gameplay, and I'm impressed. Really impressed. Now, I still need to make this disclaimer. As much as I liked chapter 2, this does not change my opinions on chapter 1. Chapter 1 is still one of the worst pieces of shit I've ever played in my opinion, and chapter 2 being good especially does not excuse the scummy and terrible actions of the heads of Mob Games. They still got involved in NFTs. They still bullied a minor almost to suicide. They still sexualized minors in their Minecraft animations. They have shitty workplace conditions. However, keep in mind that I said the heads of Mob Games and not all of them. A lot of the people who work at Mob Games are just normal, decent people with a job and actually try to create quality. But yeah, chapter 2 is pretty good, and it's far better from what I expected. Not bad at all, Mob Games. Not bad at all.